education. I did art, guitar, German language, pattern making, and loads of cooking classes. It was such a great community opportunity and good for mental health. Gornas, have you ever done a night class of any sort?
Actually, it's funny you say that. I did self-defense courses when I was much, much younger, and there were night classes. And I couldn't agree more with these comments about how much good they do within the community to be able to access them. And they are good for mental health, and they're fantastic for personal development, and definitely good for people who actually have daytime jobs and have to make a living. So the only other time they can do these things is at nighttime. So it's pretty sad that they're gone for sure. So I couldn't relate and agree with these comments more.
It was part of they used to see them a lot. I mean, they're still here and there in pockets, aren't they, Alan? But you used to open the pamphlets and see a whole ream of things, be it woodworking or quilt making or photography or learning a language.
And if I could play devil's advocate here for just a second, gosh, we could put them all online now. Or is that just being a little bit?
Well,
because that's what the online practitioners, I think, would,
is it the same?
would want. No, of course it's not the same. It's absolutely not the same.
Going to a night class at 7:30 p.m. having a cuppa and
it's totally different, and that's my point. You can't do everything online.
Right.
You just can't.
Yeah. Exactly.
Banning plastic bottles. The Netherlands has just introduced a 15%, we talked about this yesterday, a 15% tax levy on plastic water bottles of 1 litre or less on top of existing taxes on plastic bottles, and the manufacturer pays the disposal costs too, as well as event organisers. Now, to libraries, I wanted to sort of read out this one because we talked about the role that the library plays in society. This is because Wellington Library has closed down and for a long time, that major Athfield-designed central library there. The beauty, says Andrew, of the Wellington Library is beyond its aesthetic. The real genius of the design is the way you can move through it and the way it's blended public pathways with serious library space without the two disturbing each other. I always enjoyed the shortcut between the Civic Square and Victoria Street. You could cut through the series of elevated pathways and stairs and past the cafe and public spaces without actually entering the library floor. It truly is spatial poetry and a great example of the kind of internal public space that Wellington is really missing right now. There's nothing like a good library, Gornas, isn't there?
It's funny because I think it makes me sad that libraries will go, but they need to, I feel like they need to, I mean, who reads books these days? I still do, but I mean, do other people still read hardcover books, and do we still need libraries? I mean, how do we make libraries more relevant?
It's a controversial point. A lot of people will go, well, when's the last time you entered a library, Gornas?
Oh, God, more than 10 years ago.
Yeah, there you go. All right, stop it. It's time to sing along now. Friday afternoon, everybody. Here we go. Alan Blackman, Gornas Vasantabar, thank you very much. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind donations. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you very much this Saturday evening. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you very much this Saturday evening. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you very much from all of us here. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you very much from all of us here. Thank you very, very, very much. You don't know how nice it all seems. It's been much better than we dreamed. Thank you very much from
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, New Zealand braces for more bad times. It's losing $5 million a day, needs millions more in government wage subsidies, and may be facing more job losses. CEO Greg Foran urges customers to take a credit instead of cash to keep the company airborne. And we go airside at Auckland International Airport. It's Tumbleweed Terminal. Get your knee off our necks. The powerful eulogy at George Floyd's memorial service. Sorry seems to be the hardest word, so goes the Elton John song. That's unless you're from EQC. CEO Sid Miller forced to apologise yet again over another blunder. And the man who stabbed a Minister horse more than 40 times is jailed.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. The owner of a miniature horse which died after being stabbed 41 times says the sentence handed to the animal's killer isn't enough. Reginald Ozan has been jailed for 30 months for willfully ill-treating 11-year-old Star. The horse was tethered to a fence in Waitati, just north of Dunedin, when Ozan attacked him overnight on February the 17th last year. He broke free but later died of his injuries. Star's owner, Mandy Mayhem Bullock, says she's disappointed by the sentence.
I honestly think, what would it take to get the maximum sentence? I mean, this is so brutal and horrific. I don't know if I just don't understand the legal system, but for us, we really wanted him to get the maximum.
Mandy Mayhem Bullock. The charge carries a maximum penalty of 5 years jail. A public health expert is calling on the government to introduce masks on flights and says its current advice is outdated. It comes after the International Civil Aviation Organisation this week adopted a number of health measures to enable safe travel in the COVID-19 pandemic. University of Otago public health expert Nick Wilson says overseas evidence shows wearing masks makes a lot of sense. He says airlines in Canada and Ireland have already introduced masks. Dr Wilson says lessons should be learned from countries like Taiwan in managing COVID-19, which avoided a lockdown by using masks, digital technology and smart quarantining. The Finance Minister says he doesn't plan on extending the wage subsidy scheme again, but hasn't ruled it out. The extended 8-week scheme starts next week and now lets businesses whose revenue has dropped by 40% apply. Originally, only those who had lost half of their income in the pandemic were eligible. Grant Robertson says the government will wait to see what other help is needed once the next 8-week extension comes to an end. And Mr Robertson says he is as keen as anyone else to move to level 1 next week, but Cabinet will make the call based on the latest information. For the 14th day in a row today, no new coronavirus cases have been reported. Mr Robertson says ministers will assess criteria, including the latest health advice and data on the economic impact.
We've done incredibly well as a country to get to this point. We're sticking to our guns on our view that doing this once and doing it right is the way to go. And I'm very optimistic. We've got another day of 0 cases today, and I hope that we have 2 more days of 0 cases over the weekend, and then Cabinet will have its decision on Monday.
Grant Robertson says if Cabinet does decide to move alert levels, it's likely to give 48 hours notice. Hundreds of people have attended the private memorial service in Minneapolis for George Floyd. Civil rights activist Reverend Al Sharpton delivered a eulogy where he said George Floyd's story has been the story of all black people in America. Our US correspondent Jagruti Dave reports.
The Reverend Al Sharpton, president of the National Action Network, spoke about the oppression of African Americans at George Floyd's memorial.
The reason we could never be who we wanted and dreamed of being is you kept your knee on our neck.
He went on to say that it was time for change.
What happened to Floyd happens every day in this country, in education, in health services, and in every area of American life. It's time for us to stand up in George's name and say, get your knee off our necks.
Reverend Sharpton also announced a new march on Washington in August.
Jagruti Dave with that report. The ferry operator Fuller's has been fined and ordered to spend $300,000 to improve health and safety. One of its ferries collided with Devonport's Victoria Wharf in 2017, leaving a passenger with serious head injuries. At today's sentencing in the Auckland District Court, Fuller's was ordered to pay an $86,000 fine and $62,000 to the injured woman. Maritime New Zealand's Neil Rowath says the RARE project order will benefit the industry.
Operators have a responsibility for keeping the public safe, and if they don't, they will be held into account. But the project order should have a much longer lasting effect by improving safety across the industry.
The case concerned Fuller's Kia catamaran, which had had 2 previous collisions. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 5. The Warriors play the Penrith Panthers in Sydney tonight, and the New Zealand Rugby League club's fitness will again be tested under the new 6-again rule. The Warriors prop Jermaine Taunor-Brown says he's happy with the rule change adopted during the break in the NRL. The rule allows refs to award the attacking team another 6 tackles for a ruck infringement rather than stop play for a penalty. Despite being one of the NRL's bigger players, Taunor-Brown says the rule definitely makes things interesting.
When you're defending, it puts you on the back foot a bit. The team's just usually coming through the middle so fast. And I found I was a bit gassed at times, but I think it's good on the attacking side of things. Can really just ramp up and go through the middle as fast as he can and hopefully create some opportunities.
5 months after breaking his neck, the former Hurricanes rugby player Michael Fatialofa is leaving hospital in England. Fatialofa feared he would never walk again after breaking a bone in his neck playing the Worcester against Saracens in January. That's the news.
Join us on Country Life each week when we take you to meet the people who put food on our tables.
All around. Ring barking the vine.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel Peninsula, Western Bay of Plenty, Taumaranui and Taupo. Showers, some heavy, possibly thundery, easing tonight and becoming isolated. Eastern Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Cloudy periods and isolated showers today, mainly fine tomorrow. From Taranaki and Taihape southwards to Wellington and Wairarapa. Remaining showers clearing to fine by tonight. A few showers developing later tomorrow, turning to rain towards the evening, briefly heavy with a strong, cold southerly change. For the South Island, fine for most, however showers persisting about southern Fiordland and Stewart Island. A period of rain spreading north from overnight tonight, reaching Marlborough tomorrow afternoon. Brief, heavy rain with a strong, cold southerly change. Snow lowering to about 400 metres in Southland and Otago early tomorrow. Chatham Islands, a few showers, clearing tomorrow afternoon. RNZ National, 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, the boss of Air New Zealand reveals refunding all its customers would ground the airline for good. The national carrier is losing $5 million a day and is bracing for potentially more job losses, saying it needs to slash $150 million from its wage bill. It's already ditched 4,000 jobs, with some employees taking a 30% cut in pay. The company's had more than $70 million from the government wage subsidy scheme, but says it will need to rely on the second round of subsidies for millions more. Last April, it carried 1.4 million passengers. This April, it was just 15,000. It's also taking a hammering from many customers unhappy that they are being offered credits instead of refunds, but the airline says it simply doesn't have the financial reserves to refund everyone. I spoke to CEO Greg Foran a little earlier and started by asking him to sum up his first 100 days.
Full of more challenges and more change than anything I've experienced ever in my life.
And you're going to have more change. You're saying that, well, there will be more job losses. When do you expect the next wave of redundancies?
Well, we're going to start working through that carefully with our team, and I would stress that redundancy is not something that we would like to have happen this time, and that's because, we've taken some action already and 4,000 Air New Zealanders have left. This next phase is just about helping us get through this dip that we're going to experience before international comes back online. So if we can work through with reduced hours, some leave without pay, those sort of things, that would be much more preferable to us. It's hard to work out exactly when the borders reopen and when we want people back, but we do want them back, so we're just trying to deal with this dip in revenue, which has gone on a bit longer than we predicted when we first did our forecast back in March and April.
You haven't ruled out redundancies though, so how many are you potentially looking at?
As I said, we don't know because it will depend exactly how we work through, and that would be the last piece of action that I would want to take.
Understand that, but do you anticipate there will be more redundancies with the money that you are looking to save?
There may be, as I've mentioned, but as I said, our preference is not to do that. Our preference is to see if we can save money using other tactics.
Okay, well, you want to save $150 million from your wage bill here. You're talking to the unions. There's going to be redundancies, isn't there?
As I said, we are talking to the unions, and yes, we're going to continue to explore all those options, and we wouldn't rule them out, but we would much rather actually have people working with us and seeing if we can solve this in a way that gets them back and employed fully in Air New Zealand.
So where are these cuts going to come from then? Is it going to be at executive level? Is it going to be through more ground, air crew? What parts of the business?
Yeah. Well, as you know, we've actually been, across the entire business, and it hasn't just been labour, of course. We've taken action in terms of capital and operating expenses, real estate, supply chain. Executives have been impacted. We've made changes there. There's been pay cuts. So all parts of the business, and, we're very sensible and careful about how we do this. But we've also got to make sure that this airline is in a great position as we deal with, an event which is really, beyond anything we've experienced previously.
Understand that, but you're looking to save $150 million from your wages bill, and that's not small change. So which areas is that going to come out of?
Well, as I said, all areas. You could be in airports. It could be a bit more in terms of cabin crew, although we've made some pretty significant changes there already. Pilots, engineering and maintenance, home office. So all parts of the business.
Are you losing money every day?
We certainly are. So we'll burn
How
through
much?
Cash at about we burn through cash at about $5 million a day at the moment. And that's because this is a highly fixed cost business. And I'm sure, as you can understand, when your turnover has been $6 billion a year and you're really only flying, a minimum amount of routes at the moment, a couple of $100 million in revenue, that will improve, hopefully, as we get the Tasman open. You don't make money. And
so
this is about us making sure we get through this phase.
So how long can you afford to burn through $5 million a day?
Well, our cash, when we began, dealing with COVID-19, it was sitting at about $1.1 billion. And we announced to the market a couple of weeks ago that was now down to 650-ish or so. So you can see that we've burnt through the best part of $500 million through the back end of February, March and April and some of May. So, you can assume that the government loan that we were able to secure, we'll need to access that sometime in the next few months. And if international borders don't open for some time, putting Australia and the Pacific Islands aside, we will have to consider what other options we take. But I'm no wiser in terms of when we'll be able to fly to the United States than many people, and our assumptions are at this stage is it's likely to be, more towards the end of next year.
Okay, so you say next couple of months you'll have to dip into that $900 million. So can you be a bit more specific? You'll definitely have to do it before the end of the year?
Definitely before the end of the year.
Can you tell us when about you think that's going to happen? Because I imagine you are watching these figures so carefully.
Well, we certainly do look at the cash at the bank every day, and as I said, we continue to review that, and sometime in the next few months we'll begin to access that loan. And part of the action that we're taking at the moment, whether it be in terms of finding another $150 million, plus some more capital, plus some more OPEX, the way we're dealing with customer credits at the moment, this is all about us creating, a platform that ensures that this airline gets through this and, not only survives it, but can revive and then thrive at the other end.
Are you going to take the second round of wage subsidy?
We certainly are, and we've been deep in discussion with everyone around that, and we'll definitely be accessing that. And I think for Air New Zealand, that is about $37 million. We got $79 million in the first round.
So you're looking for an additional $37 million?
That is correct.
So in terms of your long-haul flights then, what is the plan? Is you're going to have a direct flight to New York City? Is that gone for good? Chicago, are those gone for good, or what's your approach?
No, I believe that at a point in time we're going to be up and operating, and the United States is a really important market for Air New Zealand. And I'd like to be back flying into all those locations, and none of those are off the table.
By when?
I don't know. So we'll just have to work through and see how things eventuate in terms of whether it's a therapy or vaccine, and how borders are going to be controlled, and we'll just have to see. You know, we've made an assumption at this stage that we think probably no real significant activity until the back half of next year.
You've got a 100-day plan to revive the airline, as you put it. That takes you up to August 2022, 800-day plan. So what is your measure of success?
Well, we want to have a really great airline at that point. We think, hopefully revenues around, $4+ billion. We'll be moving less customers, we think, maybe about 13 million customers. And we want the airline absolutely in the black and profitable and innovating with customer product and creating a great environment for all our staff. So I think we can achieve that. My team think we can achieve that, and that's what we're putting in place.
Does that mean you're going to be more expensive to customers?
Absolutely not. Air New Zealand is going to be a very, very competitive airline.
Have you been talking to any other airlines, and have you, for example, talked to Chris Luxon and Rob Fyfe?
Yes, I have, and regularly talk to airline executives around the world, United, Delta, Qantas, for example, and we share ideas and thoughts and compare notes and assumptions, and it's very valuable, as it is talking to previous chief executives here, all of whom I've met and spent time with.
So the previous chief executives, have they been able to give you anything helpful that you've run with?
Incredibly helpful, and Rob Fyfe, as you know, has been down helping the government with COVID-19. He's also on the board of Air Canada, regularly in touch with him. I was talking with Christopher the other night, seeking some counsel and advice there. So, we are in touch and use each other's skills and knowledge to help navigate through this.
A lot of your customers have been complaining, and they've been complaining to us. Did you get that wrong? The credits and the refunds, did you get it wrong?
The first thing I'd say is that is incredibly frustrating for our customers, and I can understand that frustration and I empathise with them. But I also want to say that for many of them, I thank them for their support. And last weekend I was around all our call centres and getting feedback, and many of our customers do actually like the fact they could take a credit and support Air New Zealand. The simple facts are that if we went and refunded all non-refundable tickets, we'd actually be in a situation where we could not afford to operate. So, as much as I would like to be able to solve that, I can't. We've got a business that we've still got to operate. We've got staff to pay. We've got bills to pay. We've got a loan that we will draw down, and even when I take all of those things into account, there will not be enough cash in the bank should we go and refund non-refundable tickets. So the credit is a good option. We've tried to make that more palatable, extend the use of it, let people pool it, use it on a family basis. That's a change that we've just put in place today. I know our call centres have been under pressure. We've been working to reduce those call times. So, acknowledge the frustration. It is what it is. And if anyone's got any real issues, please, be patient. We're going to get to you and we will help you.
So are you urging anyone who can afford to leave their money with Air New Zealand in a credit to do so?
Absolutely. That certainly helps support the airline. And, there are over 2,500 cases where on compassionate grounds we will refund tickets that are non-refundable, because we want to try and do what we can for our customers.
So, to be clear, if you had to pay all of this money back out in refunds, that would sink you as an airline.
That is correct.
And that is Greg Foran, the CEO of Air New Zealand. Meanwhile, last night we brought you the story of Alexa Bell, an Air New Zealand customer who was forced to spend hundreds of dollars for new flights, even though she had thousands in credit with the airline. COVID-19 ended her overseas trip before it got off the ground. Air New Zealand refunded some of the flights, and she also got a $2,000 credit. But when she tried to use that to book her and her 8 family members on flights to Queenstown, Air New Zealand said no, the credit could only be used on Alexa's ticket. Many of you are caught in the same snag, so last night we did ask Air New Zealand if it was going to change its policy, and today Alexa had an update for us.
I got a call today from Air New Zealand, from a customer relations lady, and they told me that the policy has changed overnight and you may now use your credit towards other people as long as you approve it. You can't just they want to still keep some security that you don't lose your points to some scam. But, they've just, what a difference 24 hours makes.
To be clear, so we've got this straight. You had been forced to pay more money towards tickets, even though you had thousands in credit. But Air New Zealand has come back and said it will refund you the money that you shelled out and just use your credit to pay for these tickets instead.
Well, what happened was, because I'd already shelled out the money for the family to come down, so I'd already paid for them just yesterday. They said, well, you will just refund all those the money that in credit to your credit card, so that essentially it's costing me, I'm not using my credits. They've refunded me my money.
What's your reaction to that?
Well, I'm delighted, and I hope everyone else gets the same treatment, because it was really a nice service call, and they're very friendly. And I'm really happy, and I knew they'd pull through somehow.
Yeah, they only pulled through after they got a little bit of a nudge, though, didn't they, Alexa?
I know, but again, the glass half full. We're lucky to be here in the best country in the world. They did the right thing. It took a nudge, but at least they did the right thing.
And that is Alexa Bell. It is 23 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback there. Air New Zealand says it can't afford to refund everyone. It would put the airline out of business. It's losing $5 million a day and is going to have to rely on the next round of government wage subsidies. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A man who viciously stabbed a family's miniature pony 41 times has been jailed for 2.5 years after what the sentencing judge described as a cruel and barbaric attack. Reginald Ozane, who initially denied killing the pony, even visited Star's home to protest his innocence in the months leading up to his arrest. Star's owner, Mandy Bullock, told the Dunedin District Court the family lived in fear for months, and her son even slept with a baseball bat by his bed, fearing the person who killed their beloved pet would return. Louise Tanous and Tim Brown report.
Just over a year later, and finally some justice for Star. What was supposed to be a normal summer's evening for the Bullock family last February took a turn when their miniature pony died after he was fatally stabbed 41 times with a sharp instrument as he stood tethered to a fence. Reading her victim impact statement today in court, Star's owner Mandy Bullock said her family's whole life was turned upside down that day.
My heart aches for the pain and the horror of what little Star experienced. At the time, we held on to the belief that he was going to pull through, and consequently lost it with grief when he died.
Today, Reginald Ozane was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison for what Judge Michael Crosby described as a cruel, if not barbaric, attack. The court heard the 50-year-old had consumed a bottle of homebrew whiskey on the night of the attack. Mandy Bullock, a mother of 3 young children, told the court the incident had had a major effect not only on her family, but on the entire Waitati community, who spent months living on edge.
I was stressed and anxious with headaches, nosebleeds, nausea, shakes, and ongoing nightmares. The hardest part at the time was the time it took to get an arrest. 4.5 months of not knowing.
Mandy Bullock told the court Ozane, who lived just a stone's throw away from her home at the time, even visited her home before his arrest to deny any wrongdoing.
He played the victim. He alleged physical attacks. He called a meeting where he invited us to confront him at the public library. And to coincide with the search warrant, he went to the media again to say it wasn't him.
She told the court Star was a beloved pet the family had owned since he was a foal, who even came inside the house, and she felt like the family had placed him in the path of a monster.
My 3-year-old daughter will still not stop talking about it. She walks around saying, "My little pony died." My oldest daughter was the most affected because she fully grasped everything that happened. My son slept with a baseball bat beside his bed. My 3-year-old daughter will still not stop talking about it. She walks around saying, "My little pony died."
Detective Chris Henderson said it was a relief to be able to close the case.
It took a long time to actually get to the finale, really, and we're just really pleased for the family and very pleased for the community as well, and they can now put their life back together.
Speaking outside court this afternoon, supported by family and friends, Mandy Bullock said she was disappointed in Ozane's sentence and wished it was 5 years. She wants to see some change to New Zealand's animal cruelty laws in Star's memory.
I honestly think, what would it take to get the maximum sentence? I mean, this is so brutal and horrific. And nothing compares to this. There was nothing else to go by. For us, we really wanted him to get the maximum.
The SPCA's CEO, Andrea Midgen, says this case is the worst they've seen.
We're absolutely horrified at the violence that was committed against that animal, and the sheer number of times that poor horse was stabbed is just so shocking and so deliberate. It's just unfathomable.
Andrea Midgen says to minimise animal cruelty, they need people to speak up.
It's really, really important that if you see or hear anything that you have a concern about, that you actually lay a complaint so that we can investigate and make sure that we can keep the animals safe and actually keep the people away from harm as well.
Ozane is technically eligible for parole, having already served 1/3 of his sentence. He has also been disqualified from owning any animals for up to 10 years. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Louise Tanuth aho.
Auckland Airport Chief Executive Adrian Littlewood wants a blueprint for a trans-Tasman travel bubble on Cabinet's agenda when it meets on Monday. The company has cut over 100 of its jobs and could be forced to make more changes if there are lengthy delays in approving the bubble. Reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe visited Auckland Airport's deserted international terminal.
Auckland Airport's international terminal as you've never seen it before. Thousands of passengers used to travel through this building daily. Yesterday, we saw no more than 30. Check-in desks are closed. Duty-free is a thing of the past. Most aircraft remain grounded, aside from a small handful of cargo and passenger flights. Auckland Airport has seen its operations slashed as a result of COVID-19. CEO Adrian Littlewood will be hoping to see a lot more of this.
Obviously our next focus is Trans-Tasman, and Trans-Tasman is, as everyone knows, quite unique in terms of how close our two countries together. Look, I think we want to see that start as soon as it safely can for our country, recognising the health challenges that our country has to manage in terms of managing the coronavirus risk. But both Australia and New Zealand have done very well, and I think that unique tight connection between our two countries, the close information sharing between our two governments and official agencies, and the close relationships between people living on both sides of the Tasman, I think means that's a very sensible place to start and can be done safely. So our work to make a proposal with 18 other organisations to government around how we think that could get started, I think is now in with the government, and we'll wait to hear their thoughts on that.
Littlewood wants Cabinet to consider the Trans-Tasman Safe Border Group's proposal as soon as Monday.
I mean, obviously, Australia is the most popular destination for Kiwis travelling offshore. And in fact, it's pretty evenly balanced. Aussies and Kiwis travelling is about 1.5 million passengers each way. So it's important for Australia as well as it is for New Zealand. But I think in a world where, you can't travel long haul beyond those two countries, it creates an internal market of sort of somewhere between 8 to 10 million international outbound trips in a normal year that suddenly can travel within our two countries. And that would be really exciting, and I think be crucial for our tourism industry to get some of that travel back across here, to just put some fuel in the machine, hold people in jobs, and make sure that the tourism industry is able to be recovery ready, because we can't just rely on domestic tourism to do that job.
He says Kiwis deserve a clearer picture of how the government, officials and big business plan to keep the economy flying along.
I think the reality is these are very unusual circumstances and people are dealing with imperfect information. And I think that's just a reality you have to deal with. I think, though, from a looking forward point of view, as a country we've got, and I think we all deserve some deep thinking on the detail about how we restart our economy, right? Every day matters. And so I think investing in the detail and developing sophisticated answers to the problem of safely managing, and opening up our economy is important, and our country deserves it. So I think that's why we've worked really hard with our colleagues in this response on the borders, is to actually put the effort into the detail, because the politicians, the health experts and the public need to understand that it is safe to do so, and I think that applies right across the economy.
Pre-COVID-19, 30,000 passengers passed through the international terminal every day. That custom dried up overnight. Auckland Airport entered a tailspin, suspending $2 billion worth of projects, including a second runway, a planned hotel, a car park and a domestic jet hub. And that wasn't the end of the hurt.
Yeah, that's been one of the hardest things, is we've worked really hard to build up our development teams around these huge projects, and we had to move quickly to let go about 100 contractors and temporary contract workers early, and following on from that we've worked with about 100 staff. We've had to consult on those roles, and about 60 odd have left the business as a consequence. So those are the really tough discussions you've got to have, and a lot of that's had to be done through lockdown, which is equally tough for those people affected by those changes.
Littlewood says delays to a potential Trans-Tasman bubble could mean more layoffs.
You continue as you are now, does that increase the likelihood of having to make more tough decisions, or?
Yeah, possibly, and you never want to have to do that. So again, that's why our focus on restarting as soon as we reasonably can and safely can is important. But also, we're a fixed cost business. We're a big bit of infrastructure that requires sort of minimum standards and regulatory requirements to operate. So there's only so far you can take that, and we want to be ready for the recovery. That's the posture we've taken into this, both right-sizing for our new reality, but ready to recover when it's the right time to do so.
For now, though, the international terminal remains deserted. Littlewood, more than anyone, is desperate to see activity take off. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
And if you were listening to that one on the radio, do go back and look at it online, that piece from the two Nicks. The airport, we could play a game of cricket in there and not hit anything. You may not ever see it that way again. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, hundreds of people gather in the American city of Minneapolis for a memorial service for George Floyd. Displaced workers in Queenstown turn their hand to tackling a common pest, and the beautiful story of a used tea bag and a pair of burnt socks and the rescuer who walked 100 kilometres. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening, but especially on Air New Zealand. Text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and you can email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the headlines now with Susanna.
The police in Dunedin are pleased the jailing of Reginald Ozane can bring closure to the community. The 50-year-old was jailed for 30 months today for willfully mistreating a miniature horse by stabbing him 41 times in Waitati, north of Dunedin, in February last year. Air New Zealand's chief executive says the airline is losing $5 million a day. Greg Foran told Checkpoint paying out refunds to everyone who wants one would sink it and is simply not feasible. The Finance Minister says he doesn't plan on extending the wage subsidy scheme again, but hasn't ruled it out. The 8-week extension starts next week, and a change in criteria means businesses which have experienced a 40% drop in revenue can now apply. The ferry operator Fuller's has been fined and ordered to spend $300,000 on improving health and safety. One of its ferries collided with Devonport's at Victoria Wharf in 2017, seriously injuring a passenger. No new coronavirus cases have been recorded for a 14th consecutive day. The Finance Minister says the government will assess the latest health advice and data on the economic impact before making a decision about moving to level 1 on Monday. A public health expert is calling on the government to introduce masks on flights. University of Otago's Dr Nick Wilson says the current advice is outdated and that overseas evidence shows wearing masks makes a lot of sense. The Earthquake Commission is again apologising to its customers. A week and a half ago, it said sorry after a staff member mistakenly emailed the files of 8,000 people to a customer and their lawyer. Today, its chief executive is again apologising for taking until yesterday, 2 weeks after the breach, to finally contact those affected. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's time for the business news with Nona Pelsier. Nona, thanks for coming into the studio. Financial Markets Authority. OK. It's saying ANZ Bank has made false and misleading claims about credit card repayment insurance. Those are pretty strong words. What's going on?
So the FMA, and, you know, I guess they're just a bit, they've had a bit of a go at ANZ recently on other matters. So I guess they have a little patience for the bank because the bank notified it in June last year that it had misled some customers, about 300 customers, about the repayment insurance. So some of them were getting insurance, but they weren't eligible to benefit from any claim that they might make. So they were still charging them for insurance.
So they sold them a policy which was of absolutely no use to them.
Right, and then continued to charge them.
And knew it was of no use to them.
And then continued to charge them for it even after that. And then there was a number of other customers who got duplicate policies which offered them no additional benefits. So they had like even more than one policy, and that still wasn't even going to make any difference to them. So the bank, though, knew about this in 2017 and 2018. And when the Reserve Bank of New Zealand reviewed, we had this number of issues back in Australia with the Royal Commission there, and they had to report back to the Reserve Bank, and they didn't report this to the Reserve Bank. So the FMA is saying, listen, you knew about this in 2017, you knew about this in 2018, you didn't tell the Reserve Bank when they asked, and you only told us in June 2019, and we say that's not good enough, and we're taking you to court.
Right.
So we'll see what happens. That's the issue for the FMA.
So Airbnb property managers are losing clients. Why do they say that's happening?
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so there's companies that have set up around Airbnb to manage properties on behalf of landlords. So if somebody comes and rents your room or what have you, somebody else is managing that for you. Now, Airbnb say they've had no material decline in listings on Airbnb in this country and Australia. However, the property manager says that they may have the same number of listings, but they certainly don't have the same number of bookings. So whereas he was getting about this particular one company in Auckland that does property management, he was handling 300 bookings a month in the Auckland region, and now he's only handling 60. And what he's found is a number of his clients have just decided to forget about it and take their properties into long-term rental, whereas others, to save some money, and probably because they don't have that many bookings now, they've decided to just manage them themselves. So this guy is like really struggling to keep his business alive because it's really evaporated. It's another one of those knock-on effects from the downturn in the tourism sector.
Yeah, that is interesting, but also interesting because obviously there were complaints prior to this that rental properties that could be well used by workers in the area were being sucked up by overseas travellers who were hiring them as Airbnbs.
Exactly. And so now the tide has turned on that.
Yeah.
But this property manager is kind of hoping that once, particularly for people who have been managing themselves, they'll get sick of doing their own housework there and
come back,
please. Okay, so the Nzxt Top 50 Index, it fell nearly 0.5% today. Now, some people say that it's probably profit-taking because we're quite high up there. But look, that's just a drop of 51 points to 11,172. That's still quite high. The New Zealand dollar is still gaining 64.9 US cents today. And it's just a tad under 93 cents Australian, but 51.4 British pence.
51.4 British pence. It's still up there high.
It sure is.
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Pelsier with all the numbers and business for you this afternoon. Hundreds of people have gathered in the American city of Minneapolis for a memorial service for George Floyd, whose death in police custody has sparked protests across the United States for more than a week. Prominent African-American religious figures and lawyers urged those who attended to keep pushing for social change, arguing the nation is now at a turning point. The service coincided with an announcement by the state of Virginia that one of America's most prominent Confederate monuments would be removed. The ABC's James Glenday reports.
Amazing grace.
At a time when memorial services are rare due to the deadly coronavirus pandemic, hundreds gathered to remember George Floyd. It's the first of 3 tributes to the man who was killed by police in Minneapolis. The second will be held in his birthplace in North Carolina on Saturday, the third in his hometown of Houston, Texas on Monday. Family lawyer Ben Crump says today's service was more than a celebration of life.
It's also a plea to America and a plea for justice that we don't let his death be in vain. We want everybody to use their voices to say no more. We're tired of dying at the hands of the people who are supposed to protect us.
Reverend Al Sharpton delivered the eulogy, using the moment to call for new federal legislation to end racial discrimination by the police.
I'm more hopeful than I have been in a long time because I've seen more Americans of different races and in different ages standing up together, marching together, raising their voices together.
There are already some signs of change on the ground. In Virginia, Governor Ralph Northam, who was embroiled in a blackface controversy last year, announced a massive 6-story high statue honouring Confederate General Robert E. Lee would be removed from the centre of the state's capital city as soon as possible.
In 2020, we can no longer honour a system that was based on the buying and selling of enslaved people, not in 2020. It was wrong then, and it is wrong now. So we're taking it down.
It is one of the country's most prominent monuments to the Confederacy, and lawmakers expect protests. But Jay Jones, an African-American politician from Virginia, told AM he believes most people would be supportive of the decision and social change in the United States more generally.
It's unfortunate that it takes the death of an innocent black man to do this, and had conversations with folks, and I said, this probably happens a lot. It's just that it only happens to be caught on camera every so often. But I think this is a moment that we can use to really reflect on the type of people that we are.
This is what democracy looks like.
Largely peaceful protests are again taking place in several parts of the country. Some demonstrators expect them to continue through the northern summer.
We want all 4 officers that were on top of George Floyd to be convicted. Without a conviction, there is no justice. One cop is not enough. One cop is not enough. Black lives matter, and a lot of people still don't understand that to this day.
In the US Capitol, there were no arrests on Wednesday night amid a heavy security presence, and the mayor has announced there won't be a curfew for the first time since the unrest began.
The ABC's James Glenday with that report. Sorry seems to be the hardest word, or so goes the Elton John song, unless, of course, you're the Earthquake Commission. Its boss, Sid Miller, is again apologising today, just a week and a half after saying sorry to 8,000 customers for accidentally leaking their personal details to a lawyer and their client. Today's apology for taking 2 weeks to finally write to the people affected to tell them it was their details that had been leaked. And as Conan Young reports, customers say that's not good enough, and Mr Miller should resign.
It was Tuesday last week when Sid Miller put out a press release expressing embarrassment and frustration after a staff member failed to follow several key security steps and accidentally emailed a customer and their lawyer the files of 8,000 customers. Details included names, addresses and the amount of money paid out to them by EQC. At the time, Mr Miller said he was contacting affected customers and apologising for the mistake, promising his organisation would do better in future. Today, Mr Miller is again apologising, this time for taking until yesterday, 2 weeks after the breach was first discovered, to finally getting around to emailing those affected.
Look, I apologise to anybody who feels, is frustrated in terms of what's happened here. Absolutely, and we, I'm deeply frustrated and deeply, upset about what's happened. We've been working hard as an organisation to make improvements over the last few years, and something like this just undermines the progress. It undermines the trust that you have with your customers. So we are absolutely apologetic about this.
Sid Miller says since yesterday, over 200 customers have got in touch with EQC about the delay. He admits it was unacceptable to keep people hanging for such a long time to find out if their information was amongst the leaked documents.
So we've had to send a range of emails and actually letters to people. So we had to work through all of that and make sure that we were, linking the people and the addresses. So there is quite a bit of work to do underneath that. But look, I accept your point around has this taken longer than we had anticipated or that it should have done. Yes, I accept that it should have that we could have done things quicker.
One of those affected, Rosemary Spikerman, says customers should have been communicated with first instead of having to find out about the breach through the media. She says an apology is not enough and she'd now like to see some financial compensation.
An apology is an apology, and anyone can write an apology, and there will be some sincerity behind it, but it doesn't make them financially accountable for these breaches, because as soon as it becomes financially accountable, they will strengthen their security.
Sid Miller says while the lawyer has deleted the files, they've still not been able to confirm if the customer who has sent them has done the same. Rosemary Spikerman says that's a real concern.
What guarantee that the lawyer and whoever it was that it's meant to go to has not circulated that information further forward than that? Because the last major breach, multiple thousands of people, and I think that was where there was about 80,000 or something got caught up. Multiple thousands of people had copies of that Excel spreadsheet.
Another whose file was leaked, Dee Chisholm, says a key finding of the Dame Sylvia Cartwright inquiry into EQC was its failure to put customers first.
I would have thought that historically EQC would have learned from their numerous, repeated, consistent, embedded mistakes. And I would have thought they could have applied that learning into their practice in this example.
Jackie Tyther says Sid Miller now needs to stand down.
How can EQC continue to behave like this with no repercussions? So we've had many breaches. Mr Miller still has his job. Despite the public inquiry being most uncomplimentary, EQC continues, on its merry way.
Jackie Tyther wants to know if the leak represents a breach of the non-disclosure agreement she signed with EQC, which stops either party from disclosing information about her claim. She's now taking legal advice and has taken the first steps in laying a complaint with the Privacy Commissioner. Kei o tō tahi ahau mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko konanyang tēnei.
It's 12 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme. Get in touch about EQC, Air New Zealand or anything else that's caught your attention. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Hundreds of displaced Queenstown workers may be used to help tackle a growing pest problem, wilding pine. It's part of the $100 million the government announced in March to help redeploy workers affected by COVID-19. Today, Biosecurity Minister Damien O'Connor visited a wilding pine site in Skippers Canyon near Queenstown, where some tourism workers have already been redeployed. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton joined the visit.
Lee Saunders has been in the tourism industry for the past 7 years and is the owner and head guide for Alpine Luxury Tours. He had to make his guides redundant and put his business into hibernation.
A lot of people would say this to you as well. We just haven't seen it this bad, especially when the tap gets switched off and pretty much income stops flowing. We've had the wage subsidy and things like that, but you get used to one thing and you just want to keep going and, building business, and you just got to keep income coming in. So I sort of had to turn to this and help out.
Now he fells wilding pines and supervises crews on the hillsides around Queenstown.
Obviously it's helping the environment, helping the native plants and everything flourish once we get all these pines out. But it's an ongoing process, It's going to take a long time to do it, but slowly working away at it and cutting out the little green tree on the hill, you sort of feel quite good.
Wilding infestations in Skipper's Canyon date back to the gold rush in the 1860s, when miners planted trees for shelter around the historic schoolhouse. Over the last 15 years, dense infestations have been removed. Flying over the rugged, mountainous landscape covered in tussock, the rich green of wilding pines in gullies and along the hillside signal the work left to go. Central Wilding Tree Control owner-manager Eamon Saunders says it's been tough attracting New Zealanders, but he's hopeful that will improve.
Some of the Kiwis I have taken on, they basically just want to work. They've got families to feed, so they just want to be out, and they're loving it. They didn't realise how much a problem it was until we get out in the backcountry.
His crew of 8 to 10 has already gone up to 22, and Mr Saunders says he'll probably go up to 30, with redeployed Queenstown workers making up 2/3. They cover about 9,000 hectares from lake level to 6,500 feet, using chainsaws, pulling out seedlings, aerial spraying and using herbicides. Sherman Smith manages the Wilding Conifer program for Biosecurity NZ, saying the Wakatipu area is a hotspot for the invasive species.
Those areas that are impacted heavily by wilding conifers are these really unique New Zealand landscapes, and those are the areas that have lost tourism jobs through the impacts of COVID-19. So there's a really nice alignment here where we can take on workers, get them out there protecting these areas that they're involved in. Often these people from tourism have a passion for the outdoors anyway, particularly in places like Queenstown that's an adventure tourism hub. There's some really good alignment there between the types of work, and hopefully it can carry them through a bit of a rough patch coming out of COVID-19 until tourism recovers.
Queenstown Lakes Mayor Jim Bolt says it's killing 2 birds with 1 stone, creating jobs and eliminating wilding pine.
Obviously tourism is going to be quiet for quite a while, so seeing those workers finding really good, meaningful employment elsewhere is a very positive move.
The lockdown meant the Wilding Conifer Control Program could redirect some funds to begin work immediately, with $100,000 to support additional ground control and helicopter work. Biosecurity Minister Damien O'Connor expects the Queenstown project will create hundreds of jobs in the long run, with help from the latest budget.
Well, we want to ramp this up over the next few months. The money really comes on stream in July, but we've found money to get additional workers now. And then working with QLDC and working with the trust here, we'll try and have as many job opportunities as we can. But the reality is some of the money will have to be spent on helicopters because of the country.
Work on Queenstown's wilding pines is expected to ramp up next week, with more workers and helicopters tackling the pest. In Queenstown for Checkpoint, Ko Tasbrunton Tēnei.
A single tea bag and a burn sock were vital clues that led to finding trampers Jessica O'Connor and Dion Reynolds alive and well. The pair was found hungry and exhausted last week in a remote part of the Kahurangi National Park, 19 days after setting off for a hike and more than a week after they were reported overdue. One of the volunteers who helped to find them hiked more than 100 kilometres over the 7 days he spent on the ground. Dwayne Lohman of Nelson says it was the most challenging search he's been involved in. He told our Nelson reporter Tracy Neal it was also the most incredible because of the result.
Vague footprints in river gravel made the searchers' hearts sing. To the untrained, they look like small dents in the stones. To Mr. Lohman and his Landsar teammates, it's what they're trained to look for.
The team that I was in, we did locate some footprints that were consistent with the missing parties. So we tracked footsteps up the web stream and followed that for quite a period of time.
And then a campsite that included a burnt sock that Mr Reynolds later told RNZ happened as he was drying them on a campfire, and a tea bag that matched the brand found in the couple's car left at Anatore.
At that particular campsite, we found a fireplace, which gave us hope. We found a tea bag and also a cut-off label, and also where the party had been sleeping.
The missing trampers' footsteps indicated they had continued upstream, but the weather was turning and the searchers were evacuated. Mr Lohman says the area is prone to flash floods and their safety was a priority. But the clues they'd found helped narrow the search area to the zone in which Reynolds and O'Connor were soon found.
A lot of intel came in from a lot of areas and a lot of people, and that intel there narrowed the search area and allowed for dog teams to be deployed on both ridge lines, and also a chopper to be able to grid search that area, which ultimately did find the missing parties.
A Defence Force helicopter spotted smoke from their fire, and the two were soon winched to safety. Mr Lohman says his team was about 3 kilometres away and had to bush bash their way back to a safe zone for the night. The seasoned hiker and hunter, who's familiar with the mountainous Upper South Island, says it was his toughest search so far.
There was some very challenging parts to it as far as the terrain goes. Personally, it would be some of the most challenging terrain I've been in, from the rivers, the slimy, slippery creeks, and certainly the bush over there is very, very thick, often cutty grass above our heads that went on for hours and hours of bashing your way through.
Landsar's training manager says about 75% of land-based SAR operations are concluded within 12 hours. Tony Wells says the 7 to 8 day Kahurangi operation was long by comparison, but not their longest. He classed its difficulty as moderate. Alpine searches are the toughest, but in this case they had the missing pair's youth and fitness on their side.
All the way through, from a search and management point of view, was always very likely that they were alive, because the only two things that take out two people simultaneously is usually catastrophic river crossing or avalanche, and those conditions didn't exist through most of the search.
Mr Wells says often the most challenging part of remote operations is the lack of communication. It often requires building a temporary network for the use of two-way VHF radio from the field to the command base.
We deploy a bunch of portable repeaters, so we create a temporary network throughout the search area. Part of the initial actions would have been getting that set up so that there is VHF coverage.
Land Search and Rescue's Chief Executive Carl McConey says apart from 17 paid staff, it relies entirely on 3,500 volunteers.
You're talking about representatives from right across the community. So you have your traditional field teams, and those are the people that have some bush skills and can work in the bush environment, as you saw with this operation. But we also have search teams that work in an urban and suburban environments as well as rural environments.
Tony Wells says it's getting harder to attract volunteers with the skills and time to take on the role.
Historically, that was a little bit easier because most of our volunteers came from tramping clubs or hunting clubs and were enthusiastic outdoor people. In modern society, and certainly with activities trending more towards either shorter trips or alternate activities like mountain biking, it has become hard in some locations.
Dwayne Lohman says he's only able to help because of the support from his wife, his 2 young children and his team at work. The real estate agent of 20 years says he's lost count of the times he's been called out. The recent search came on top of 4 weeks of COVID-19 lockdown, but he's not counting lost income.
I guess life comes first, and to me it's a no-brainer. We get out and do what we can to help others. I've got a great support network within the company, and I've got a group of salespeople that can also back me up and help with any potential sales.
Mr Lohman says it's less a miracle they were found than it was expert management.
I think we would have found them by the chopper or by the dog crew or by the trackers that were in the area, but an absolutely incredible result and a credit to all that were involved.
Mr Lohman says he's not yet spoken with either Ms O'Connor or Mr Reynolds, but hopes that will happen one day. Right now, he's focused on sharing Lanzar's main wish that anyone heading out into the wild carry a personal locator beacon. In Nelson for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
A lot of you getting in touch about our interview with the CEO of Air New Zealand. Vicky says, we don't want air refunds, just air points that would work and we wouldn't have this hassle. Why hasn't the CEO come on sooner? There are ways of making us understand. He hasn't tried any of them. This one from Philip, who says, having lived in Hawke's Bay and endured Air New Zealand's predatory monopolistic pricing, I could not care less whether they survive or not. I will fly any other airline where I have a choice. Their appeals to New Zealanders' better nature is pathetic. They have burnt their goodwill with the regions.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with DNA. A man has been jailed for 30 months after stabbing a miniature horse 41 times. Reginald Ozane appeared in the Dunedin District Court this afternoon to be sentenced for willfully ill-treating Star, an 11-year-old pet horse. Timothy Brown was in court.
Ozane pleaded his innocence for a year after the attack, but in March, the 50-year-old finally pleaded guilty. Star was tethered to a fence in Waitati, just north of Dunedin, when Ozane attacked him overnight on February the 17th last year. The horse broke free, but died from his wounds a day later. Star's owner, Mandy Mayhem Bullock, says she wished Ozane received the full 5-year maximum jail term. He is technically already eligible for parole after serving 1/3 of his sentence. In the Dunedin District Court, Timothy Brown.
Air New Zealand's chief executive says paying out refunds to everyone who wants one would sink the airline. The airline is losing $5 million a day, has already shed 4,000 jobs and may have to cut more. Greg Foran says another $150 million needs to go from its wage bill. Mr Foran told Checkpoint offering refunds for all cancelled flights is simply not feasible.
We'd actually be in a situation where we could not afford to operate. So, as much as I would like to be able to solve that, I can't. We've got a business that we've still got to operate. We've got staff to pay. We've got bills to pay.
Air New Zealand CEO Greg Foran. The Earthquake Commission is again apologising to its customers. A week and a half ago it said sorry after a staff member mistakenly emailed the files of 8,000 people to a customer and their lawyer. Details released include names, addresses and the amount of money EQC paid out to clients. Today, its Chief Executive Sid Miller is again apologising, this time for taking until yesterday, 2 weeks after the breach was first discovered, to finally get around to emailing those affected.
Look, I apologise to anybody who feels, is frustrated in terms of what's happened here. Absolutely. I'm deeply frustrated and deeply, upset.
Sid Miller says while the lawyer has deleted the files, the customer has yet to do so. Twitter has removed a video tribute to George Floyd posted by President Donald Trump's re-election campaign because of copyright reasons. The Team Trump account tweeted out a nearly 4-minute-long video with audio of a speech the president gave a few days after Mr Floyd died in police custody. He warns about violence and anarchy from radical left-wing groups over images of riots and looting. A message on the social media platform now says the video was taken down in response to a report by the copyright owner. A spokesperson for the Trump campaign says it's another reminder that Twitter is making up the rules as it goes along. A public health expert is calling on the government to introduce masks on flights and says its current advice is outdated. It comes after the International Civil Aviation Organisation this week adopted a number of health measures to enable safe travel in the COVID-19 pandemic. University of Otago public health expert Nick Wilson says that based on evidence, wearing masks on board aircraft makes a lot of sense.
I think the idea about requiring masks on flights is a very good one. In fact, some airlines are already doing this around the world. Canadian Airlines, Irish Airlines, for example. And we have actually seen in the literature some examples of COVID-19 spread on planes.
Dr Nick Wilson. The Green Party says the Air Force's new planes are a waste of money. The government is spending more than $1.5 billion on 5 new Lockheed Martin Super Hercules to replace the troublesome 1960s fleet. The Greens Defence spokesperson Golriz Garaman says the country shouldn't be investing in war-making capabilities and should have looked at cheaper options.
What makes these planes really expensive, though, is that they also have war-making capability. And we say that given, that we all agree the bulk of the work of NZDF isn't going to be war-making, we do need to rethink the way we spend.
Golriz Garaman from the Greens. The new Super Hercs will start to arrive from 2024. It's 4.5 minutes past 6. The Warriors have had another injury blow ahead of the NRL game against the Panthers, which kicks off at 8 p.m. Wing Ken Maumalo has been replaced by 22-year-old Adam Pompey after Maumalo picked up a hamstring injury in training. The Blues coach, Leon McDonald, says Dan Carter's presence is already having an impact on the younger members of the Super Rugby team squad. After the shock news of his signing, the 2-time World Cup winning All Black trained with his new team for the first time in Auckland yesterday. Carter wants to give back to New Zealand rugby, and McDonald says it's great to have a player of such calibre involved.
Young guys that come up to him already and they're pinching themselves, they don't know whether they go and shake his hand or get an autograph. So yeah, it's surreal for some of our players. So we're pretty fortunate, and I think it's probably a strength of New Zealand rugby is our willingness to give back and commit, and holds us in good stead moving forward if we get more players like Dan willing to give back to the game.
Leon McDonald. Meanwhile, Australia's top rugby players will be stopping from turning out for lower grade clubs during the domestic Super Rugby Australia competition to help curb the spread of the coronavirus. That's the news.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Look, we're a resilient lot. We've been through our trials and tribulations before. We'll come back.
Live with local, national and international stories and a slice of creativity.
I'm a bit of a shoe freak, and there's this gorgeous pair of 1930s black and gold high-heeled sandals.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel Peninsula, Western Bay of Plenty, Taumaranui and Taupo. Showers, some heavy, possibly thundery, easing tonight and becoming isolated. Eastern Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy periods and isolated showers today, mainly fine tomorrow. From Taranaki and Taihape southwards to Wellington and Wairarapa, remaining showers clearing to fine weather by tonight, a few showers developing later tomorrow, turning to rain towards the evening, briefly heavy with a strong cold southerly change. For the South Island, fine for most of the South Island, however showers persisting about southern Fiordland and Stewart Island. A period of rain spreading north from overnight tonight, reaching Marlborough tomorrow afternoon. Briefly heavy with a strong cold southerly change. Snow lowering to about 400 metres in Southland and Otago early tomorrow. Chatham Islands, a few showers clearing tomorrow afternoon. RNZ National. It's 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Families affected by Pharmac's decision to switch brands of epilepsy drugs say they have had no say in a report into the drug buying agency's processes and are insulted by its findings. The review, which was commissioned by Pharmac, found its processes were of a high standard, but it should have consulted its consumer advisory group. It comes as the chief coroner has confirmed to RNZ that she's investigating whether a seventh death is linked to patients being switched to a generic anti-epilepsy drug called Logum. And a doctor who deals with epileptic children has come forward saying Pharmac is forcing her to start children on the generic drug, which she is deeply uncomfortable with, given the coroner's findings have not yet been released. Investigative journalist Guyon Espiner has been covering the issue for more than a year and filed this report.
About 48,000 New Zealanders have epilepsy, but paediatric neurologist Dr. Cynthia Sharp says it's especially hard for children.
Epilepsy is a pretty cruel illness. It's, the children look like they're dying, they have little death attacks, and if that happens repeatedly, we need to start a medicine.
The medicine she wants to start them on is the originator brand of lamotrigine called Lamictal. She says in her experience there are fewer of the side effects seen in other brands, such as impacts on mood and cognitive function.
So it's almost always my first choice, and so I would often pitch it to parents as, the best option and something I'd be happy with my own kid having to be on for years.
Lamictal was the drug that most epilepsy patients were on before Pharmac decided to switch about 10,000 people to a generic form of the drug called Logum in a bid to save $30 million over 5 years. After adverse reactions, including deaths, were reported, Pharmac allowed people to switch back to their original brands if they were having problems on Logum. Nearly 2,400 patients have now got special approval to have their original brand funded, rather than take the Logum generic. But Dr. Sharp says that option is not available for her patients starting treatment, and for those children, Pharmac will only fund the Logum brand.
And I have since contacted the medical director of Pharmac saying, look, this is inequitable and you're taking away my best drug for new patients with epilepsy. And he sounded sympathetic and seemed like he was going to try to arrange access for these new patients, but that was not possible. We later heard that they were not going to get access, so I'm without that best medicine.
Pharmac Chief Executive Sarah Fitt says it's the switching of brands that's raised concerns, not the quality of the Logum drug, which she said was safe and effective.
Certainly our clinical advice would be if you were starting with one brand, there shouldn't be any issues. It's a registered product. It's been looked at by MedSafe. It's used all over the world as a safe and effective treatment for epilepsy.
But Dr. Sharp says she doesn't feel comfortable starting children on the drug when the chief coroner is still looking at whether the change in brand may have changed seizure control and contributed to the deaths. The chief coroner confirmed to RNZ that it has now added a 7th death to its investigation. A patient in Rotorua died earlier this year after being switched from Lamictal to Logum in September of 2019.
Wouldn't you think that while we're waiting for the coronial inquest into 7 deaths, that I would be able, as an interim measure, to prescribe the best drug that I had for new children with epilepsy?
Pharmac has, though, commissioned a review into its processes for managing the brand change. The report by a specialist health sector law firm, Claro Law, did not look at whether the deaths may have been linked to the brand switch, only at the quality of Pharmac's decision-making processes. Sarah Fitt says Pharmac was pleased with the results.
I think the review has reiterated that we did follow a good process. It was robust, it was evidence-based.
But the report did criticise Pharmac for not consulting its Consumer Advisory Committee earlier in the process. The committee wasn't consulted until June 2019, but could have been brought in at least 3 years earlier when the idea of switching brands of lamotrigine was first discussed.
And that's certainly something we're keen to progress the recommendations and incorporate that into our wider work that we've already got going on, increasing our consumer input.
But patient advocate Arabella Gube, whose young daughter has epilepsy, says the report is a whitewash and insulting to those who have been harmed in the brand switch. She says the reviewers should have reached out to patients and their families.
The weight that Pharmac are giving this in terms of finding themselves blameless in this deeply disturbing saga is hugely insulting to the families. Their voices haven't been heard. What we've always wanted is an independent review, an independent inquiry into what has happened here. And what we've got is a review paid for by Pharmac, where they've set the parameters, where they've chosen the lawyers, where no one external has been consulted, and we're being told that Pharmac have done nothing wrong.
Meanwhile, Cynthia Sharp says she's left with a drug that she's not yet comfortable starting children on.
I have had multiple patients report side effects on the Logem brand, and now we've also got this intense fear in the community about the Logem brand. It's not in my power to assess whether it's adequate. We need a systematic process with, hundreds of patients to assess whether it's adequate.
Sarah Fitt maintains there's no need for the concern about Logum, otherwise it wouldn't be on the market.
MedSafe review all these reports, and if MedSafe had concerns around safety of the medicine, then they would act on that. They wouldn't wait on the coroner's report. If any issues around safety of medicine sits with MedSafe, and they will withdraw a medicine or recall it if there's an issue.
The issue of Pharmac's process has been given high marks by the report it commissioned. The report from the chief coroner into 7 deaths is still months away. For Checkpoint, ko Guy and Espana tēnei.
An extra 40,000 struggling businesses will be able to access the next round of the wage subsidy scheme following a drop in eligibility requirements. The current wage subsidy scheme runs out on Monday, having paid out nearly $11 billion to cover 1.6 million jobs. A new round of payments will be made available next week, with 230,000 businesses forecast to take up the offer. Nita Blake-Person has this update.
Businesses were going to have to show a 50% drop in revenue to access the wage subsidy, but that's now dropped to 40%. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says the original scheme may have excluded some businesses who really needed the cash.
It became clear to us that some of the businesses that we were wanting to target may not have been able to meet the original threshold for the extension. This is particularly businesses who weren't able to operate in levels 4 and 3, but are coming back on stream under level 2. We're talking here about retail, hospitality, tourism businesses.
Around 230,000 businesses are estimated to now be eligible for the scheme, with applications opening next Wednesday. Grant Robertson says that will cover around 910,000 workers.
It's going to cost about another $700 million if it's fully taken up, being a total of about $3.9 billion.
Canterbury Chamber of Commerce Chief Executive Leanne Watson says the change in eligibility criteria is great news. After a couple of busy weekends when lockdown lifted, she says some businesses saw a bump which may not last.
So we've had this spike which has been really positive for business, but that has created that extra revenue that we may find just sort of tends to even out over the next month or so, as opposed to remaining at that very high peak. So because of those that pent-up demand and that immediate response from people, that has pushed them, under that 50% threshold. So they were concerned that while they might be under it at that particular time, in a month's time, they may very well be well and truly over it again.
Air New Zealand, which has received the biggest wage subsidy payout to date at a total of $78 million, will also be applying for the next round and hopes to get another $37 million. Sky City has said it's too early to say whether it will go for more. Fletcher Construction has said it won't be applying, neither will Coca-Cola or the Warehouse Group. Leanne Watson says it's smaller businesses who will be particularly pleased with the change in criteria because the wage subsidy buys them time.
I think what this will do is it will certainly give them some more time to make those decisions and to be able to work through, what that impact might be for a longer period of time. Because, the more we open up our economy, the more certainty we've got, the more future view we've got of how things are actually going to shape up.
Abby Hutchins is the Chief Executive of the Marlborough Tour Company. She'll be applying for the wage subsidy extension, but for fewer staff than the first round.
It helps us pay salaries to some people that we might have otherwise had to let go. And those jobs, if you like, they're more in the nature of sort of full-time roles rather than fixed-term or casual contracts.
She says it's not a silver bullet, but it will help.
I think fundamentally the issues are bigger than what a wage subsidy can support, but it does give you a bit more flexibility to take a few more risks than you might otherwise have been able to.
The government today also announced an extension of more than a month to apply for the Small Business Cash Flow Loan Scheme. But Abby Hutchins says it will be the eventual opening of the borders which will provide her business the support it's really after. For Checkpoint, Nita Blake-Person.
It's 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. More commercial properties in our big cities are up for lease as some businesses close and others look to downsize. Even as the prospect of returning to level 1 and normal life beckons, is there a risk our inner cities could become ghost towns or boarded up shops in office blocks? Ruth Hill reports.
If you've traded a 40-minute commute on the Northwestern Motorway for a 4-second shamble in your dressing gown from the breakfast table to your home office, you may not be relishing the prospect of returning to the CBD. And you're not alone. An Otago University survey of nearly 3,000 people during lockdown has found nearly 90% would like to keep working from home in future, at least some of the time. It's an attractive proposition for employers too, with massive savings to be made in rent, electricity and instant coffee. Property Council Chief Executive Leonie Freeman says some businesses are seeking to shrink their CBD footprints in the post-COVID era for different reasons.
What you might see in the shorter term is more co-sharing, and people might look and say, okay, well, we've got a little bit of extra space. We might look at co-sharing some of our space. You're probably going to see offices wanting to be, or businesses looking for a little bit more flexibility, and, you know, just being open to some change.
Ms Freeman says a survey by the organisation during lockdown found 60% of projects with resource consent have been halted.
The developers have probably said, look, we're just going to put it on hold for the moment. We want to understand where everything's going to go. And so when you've got these periods of uncertainty, then some of these projects will go on hold.
However, Auckland Mayor Phil Goff isn't worried about the inner city turning into a wasteland of abandoned projects. In fact, he sees an upside for the council, which has a lot of critical, shovel-ready infrastructure projects ready to roll.
It may be advantageous that there is less pressure on skilled staff, less pressure on materials, and less pressure of inflation on the construction price index than we had before, when we were getting growth at historically extraordinarily high levels.
Mr Goff expects some people will never return to work in the CBD, and that's not a bad thing in his view.
It saves them time commuting, it saves them money. And actually for the city, it also helps reduce our peak hour congestion, and it helps reduce our carbon emissions. So I'm not against that overall, and the beneficiaries of that may, of course, be some of the suburban cafes and places that people will visit.
TradeMe figures from May show a 5% increase in the number of commercial properties for lease compared with the month before. In the Bay of Plenty, it was up a massive 35% compared with the same time last year. Wellington developer Ian Castles says some workplaces may opt for bigger offices in future to allow for social distancing.
We may need more space per person, so the net effect on Wellington commercial office buildings may not be noticeable at all. It might be that people have more space. It may be that part of the office is not there Mondays and the other part of the office is not there Fridays or whatever.
Ian Castles is confident people will return to the cities because that's been the trend for decades.
I can't see why, when they start coming back, why they won't get addicted to what they used to love.
The government will announce on Monday when the country can move to level 1 restrictions and normal life can resume for most of us. It's not yet certain, however, what the new normal will look like in the CBD. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
The man who's now the key suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann is serving a jail sentence in Germany for raping a 72-year-old woman. German prosecutors say the man, identified as Christian B, was living near the Portugal resort when 3-year-old Madeleine disappeared in 2007. The suspect has been described as a sexual predator who has already been convicted of crimes against little girls. The McCanns believe the latest lead is potentially very significant and hope it brings them closer to the answers they've been seeking for 13 years. The BBC's Jenny Hill reports.
It's a case which has baffled detectives for years. Madeleine McCann disappeared during a family holiday in the resort of Praia da Luz. Her parents have never given up hope of finding her, but today a prosecutor in the city of Braunschweig said that he had opened a murder inquiry. Hans Christian Wolters said the detectives believed that a German man had killed Madeleine McCann.
We're assuming that the girl is dead. And the suspect? We're talking about a multiple sexual predator who's already been convicted of crimes against little girls and is serving a long sentence.
That sentence is reported to be for the rape of a 72-year-old American woman who was attacked in Praia da Luz 2 years before Madeleine disappeared. Police, who believe that the suspect was in the resort on the night the 3-year-old went missing, say he lived in Portugal for more than a decade, funding his lifestyle by dealing drugs and burgling hotels and holiday apartments. Jim Gamble is the former chief executive of the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre.
So what you have now is you have an individual with a history of sexual offending that spans girls through to older women. Extremely dangerous. He's not a preferential offender. He's someone, that we know from what we're told, who will offend across a range of ages. Also with a history, we are told, of burglary. So fits the profile.
Police in Germany, Portugal and Britain are appealing to the public for information. Scotland Yard has taken a more cautious approach to the case than the German investigators, saying it has no conclusive evidence as to whether Madeleine is alive or dead. In a statement, her family thanked detectives for their continued efforts, saying they just wanted to find her.
The BBC's Jenny Hill with that report. A public health expert is calling on the government to introduce masks on flights and says its current advice is outdated. It comes after the International Civil Aviation Organisation this week adopted a number of health measures to enable safe travel in the COVID-19 pandemic. Aside from the use of masks, the recommendations include testing, distancing, screening, contact tracing, health declarations and regular sanitation. The Ministry of Health says it is reviewing the guidance and has some measures like declaration, screening and tracing already in place. Nzxt has the story.
University of Otago public health expert Nick Wilson says based on overseas evidence, wearing masks on board aircraft make a lot of sense.
I think the idea about requiring masks on flights is a very good one. In fact, some airlines are already doing this around the world. Canadian Airlines, Irish Airlines, for example. And we have actually seen in the literature some examples of COVID-19 spread on planes.
Dr. Wilson says research from Hong Kong shows that 99% of people who go outside cover their faces, and despite its dense population, the city has only had 4 deaths. He has urged our Ministry of Health to update its advice on masks and criticised its previous recommendations.
There was some very poor advice, I think, provided by the Ministry, and it was partly based on the fear that we would run out of masks and there wouldn't be masks available for health workers. And that is no longer a valid concern.
The Ministry of Health told RNZ in a statement that it is currently reviewing the guidelines by ICAO and it is working with stakeholders to implement any additional measures. Aviation commentator Peter Clark says with New Zealand having gone 2 weeks without a coronavirus case, ICAO's advice isn't needed. He says it will also be hard for passengers to wear masks on long-haul flights.
Well, to be honest with you, I think it would be very hard sometimes to be wearing masks for 14-odd hours. You have to eat, you have to blow your nose, you have to do things, and it's only reducing the potential risk. It doesn't alleviate the risk.
Mr. Clark believes the proposals should only affect high-density countries.
But I think for New Zealand, we don't need these. And when we go into level 1, I think these are very unnecessary. But certain people may want to do these things, and there is aspects of cleaning the aircraft and that sort of thing is quite essential.
But Professor Nick Wilson says people will be compliant with wearing masks on flights if they are introduced.
People have to be well hydrated on a long flight and have meals, but that is a manageable risk, and people can lift up their masks for meal times and so on, but pull them down afterwards. And with proper mask design, it's very comfortable to say sleep in them, for example.
Nick Wilson says New Zealand must learn lessons from successful countries like Taiwan in managing COVID-19, which avoided a lockdown by using masks, digital technology and smart quarantining. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Nzxt.
The government is committing to buying more than $1.5 billion worth of new planes for the Defence Force. It's purchasing 5 new Lockheed Martin Super Hercules to replace the outdated 1960s Hercules fleet. However, the Green Party says the country shouldn't be investing in war-making capabilities and should have looked at cheaper options. Here's our Defence reporter, Jonathan Mitchell.
The bulk of the $1.5 billion is going on the 5 new planes, as well as a flight simulator and other supporting infrastructure. The new planes will continue in the path of the old fleet, humanitarian and aid assistance, as well as Pacific and Antarctic missions. The Greens Defence spokesperson, Golriz Garaman, says it's not money well spent.
What makes these planes really expensive, though, is that they also have war-making capability. And we say that given, that we all agree the bulk of the work of NZDF isn't going to be war-making, we do need to rethink the way we spend.
However, a professor of strategic studies at Victoria University, Robert Asen, says the purchase is long overdue and necessary.
The Hercules are very, very heavily used. They're not about the hard end of combat. They don't have that political sensitivity attached to them. So any government, I think, would want the sort of capability that the Hercules replacements would bring.
The huge spend is smaller than the $2.3 billion on the Orion replacement. That's the new P-8 Poseidon fleet, which is still a few years away from delivery. Both 1960s Hercules and Orion fleets have become more expensive to repair and maintain as the years go on and parts are harder to find. The Defence Minister, Ron Marks, says it's been blindingly obvious for years the Hercules days are numbered.
8 days ago, we had none available. This is not the first time we've had none available. When that happens, we worry because search and rescue can happen at any time. Cyclones can happen at any time. And very often, the types of repairs that the Air Force are having to carry out are repairs that Lockheed Martin have never ever heard of because no one's ever kept an C-130 as long as we have.
He says it's likely one or two of the old fleet will be kept for display purposes. The new Super Hercs will start to arrive from 2024. For Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell at home.
Let's get to some of your feedback before we head off. A lot of you getting in touch about Air New Zealand. Dave says, wow, that would have to be one of the most honest, open responses from a big company CEO I have heard for some time. Well done, Air NZ. You have the right person at the helm. Another person, though, says the bigger question would surely have to be, do we actually need a national airline? Is owning a national airline simply a sentimental possession rather than a sound business decision? And someone else says their credit for 5K expires in 12 months, ridiculously short given the situation, and Air New Zealand would not extend. Amber puts it very succinctly. Air New Zealand, oh my goodness, get the violin, says Amber. Appreciate all your feedback. Have a wonderful weekend. We're back on Monday.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The owner of a miniature horse which died after being stabbed more than 40 times says its killer should have received the maximum 5-year sentence. Air New Zealand's chief executive says more job losses could be on the way at the airline, but they're trying to avoid it. The Biosecurity Minister says funding to tackle wilding pine could provide much-needed jobs for hard-hit Queenstown. And Auckland's mayor says he's not worried at the prospect of a smaller, less crowded CBD in the post-COVID era. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather will be at 7. Then it's Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life meets the Wagyu beef farmers Claire and Evan Chapman, who discovered a willow grove on their Canterbury farm was home to a colony of peka, long-tailed bats. Robbie Nicol tells lies about Roger Douglas and Marilyn Waring. Greg Johnson is this week's Friday Night Live act, and we've got a Sonic Tonic